Welcome back to What's New with Mead. We're in episode number 62, and I have a very fun guest. His name is Steven, and he is a fantastic friend of mine, beer brewer, mead maker extraordinaire, and he is here to chat all about his brewing experience, especially with beer, and how it might parallel to some mead experience. We sort of recorded this while doing some other things, and it was an unofficial podcast episode, but post the recording, I was like, this is such great information for us as the beer, mead, wine, cider brewing people that we are. So I hope you enjoyed this wonderful tasting, because we tasted some mead with him, but also conversation with Steven all about mead. Let's get started with it. Welcome, Steven, to a fun, weird, new tasting of a mead that has no real documentation. We just got finished recording a beer. You helped me review a beer that was also very odd. So now we're going to go to a mead. So hopefully you're ready for some sweet stuff, because that one was, I guess the other one was sweet too. So this will be more sweet. So I couldn't find a fun name, and I was trying to be creative, because I feel like every single time you get on a mead competition or something, there's always someone with a creative name. And I'm normally the type of guy that's like blackberry mead and just keep it real basic.
I love that.
Do you come up with creative names when you submit things?
They kind of just are what they are. I don't think I have many. I've only entered the Squid Game one because it was in the Squid Games. I remember I did the watermelon one that I did a traditional, and then I doused it with amaretti watermelon, and then I named it, this one's for Garrett, and it got an honorable mention. It took fourth place, so I was like, all right, that's cool. Besides that, I just...
Yeah, you had a recent one too in Storm Heron. Was it Get Steved? Was that what it was?
So I didn't do that.
Oh, who was that?
So I entered it as OB Trad.
Okay.
It was just an Orange Blossom traditional, and somehow Will just started calling it Steved.
That's funny.
And so that just caught on. I had nothing to do with that. But yeah, now I'm a meme.
Now you reach there you go. That's the highest block we get to be in life, is a meme at some point. It's only downhill from here.
Yeah.
Well, what we're tasting is the Vacationing Dragon. That was my attempt at a fun name. It is a mead with passion fruit, dragon fruit, and tropical honey. The tropical honey was the base for this. I basically did... The intent of this whole mead and this thing I was making was I had a huge batch of must, and then I just basically pitched, like I do in many videos, 2 different yeast. And I was like, what's the difference? It was 2 unknown yeast I'd never used. They sat for 6 months, and I didn't do anything else with them. I started this video, and then I started to parse the mead out for things. And so part of it went to some competition stuff that I was going to do, and then I had a couple gallons of it here, and I was walking through the grocery store, as everyone does, dreaming about what combinations I could come up with, and ran across passion fruit and dragon fruit. And so I was like, well, that seems tropical. And I guess it is. And just threw them in there. Threw not a lot into about 4 gallons of this. So I did that. I oaked it, added some more honey, and that's it. I think I put some wine tannin in or something. But I'll be curious to see what you think. And part of the fun of today in this video is I want to pick your brain about how your beer brewing experience has impacted your mead making experience. Because from what I understand and what I know about you is that you started with beer brewing, and then you eased your way into mead over time. So I guess my first question is, and we can go and pour some of this stuff too so people can see, is what got you to go from beer to mead? Was it just kind of boredom, or were you did you try some mead, or what happened?
So this kind of happened. I had been managing the East Brother Tap Room for a long time, which is the brewery that I work at currently. And um, I just saw kind of a trend in people wanting gluten-free options and things like that. And I noticed cider had an uptick before, not too long ago, and it wasn't big, like it wasn't prominent, but they did have like this kind of little mini cider boom, right?
Mhm.
And I was like, okay, well, people are looking for these other alternative options um, to just wine and beer, and cider kind of came up. And then I was thinking that mead would, I was like, I don't even know how I found out. Like, I don't even remember like when I had a mead or something like that. It just kind of popped into my head, like, oh, mead, mead, mead. That's what people are gonna want.
Yeah.
And so uh, I just went on and started reading about it. Like Ken Schramm's book and some other random books that I have lying around the house about mead making. And I started making my first batch um, out of just a carboy and a wine fridge that I got for free.
Oh.
Uh, and it was a sizer. I made a sizer was my first
Oh,
batch.
okay.
Um, and I liked it. I thought it was really good. And I thought, okay, like I think this is kind of fun and it's got something I like. It's different than beer in some ways. But there are a lot of like common ground that they share. So I like that I already had kind of like a little bit of knowledge on hand, but it was still not coming home and doing work.
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
so that's kind of how I like dove into it. And I think we're still seeing it, man. I feel like there's a lot of meaderies opening up, and I forgot the exact stats, but there are quite a bit of meaderies now compared to like a decade ago.
Hmm.
They're just kind of coming around, and I think after the like whole cider thing kind of slows down, which it is, or not the cider, the hard seltzer thing
Yeah.
starts slowing down a bit. Right now, we're seeing a lot more of the ready to drink cocktails kind of diving in.
Yeah.
Um, but I think mead's going to end up finding a spot, especially with more people making lower alcohol things that kind of are catering to like the everyday person and not spending $30 on a bottle that they've never had mead before.
Yeah.
It's a little bit more welcoming.
Yeah. I feel like that's been the hardest thing to sell mead to people who can't get it for free from people like us who make it, is like, hey, go try this thing. I think it's good, but you should try it and spend 30, 40, sometimes $50 on, I mean, like commercial meat is just so expensive. And I understand because it is expensive to make. However, that doesn't make it any easier for people to be like, yeah, I'll spend $45 on this bottle and hope it's good. It's like, oh my gosh, it's interesting. But so I have to ask, how was that first mead? Because I feel like everybody has a similar experience in that the first one I don't think is ever all that great. My first one was not great, but maybe you were an anomaly in this.
So the first one was good enough for me to want to do it again.
Okay, yeah.
So it was good enough to where I kind of felt the whole little like rush and the pride of I made it. It tastes good, you know. Uh, but then I feel like I did a lemon one after that, lemon or lime. Um, I did a green tea one where I learned about stabilizing failures, and then I did a cherry one that was horrible. I have done so many cherry ones and failed.
Yeah.
I'm on the search for a good cherry mead.
It's hard to do. It's
But
really hard.
yeah, it was okay.
Well, in front of us is this again this passion fruit dragon fruit, and I'm curious what you think. I think it looks pretty good clarity wise, which I'm happy about.
Yeah, your clarity on all of like this one and the blueberry one. I don't know what you're doing, man, but that's some good clarity.
I am a big Chitosane and Kisasol person. I'm a big fan of
Really?
that. Yep. I have had great luck, and I buy it in like the bulk. I don't know if you've ever bought it, but you can buy it like a half gallon of it basically, and then I just use. I mean, I've been working on this bottle for a year and a half. Like this thing will. I think yeah, this will do 100 and over 100 gallons or more, something like that. So it's pretty ridiculous.
Wild. Yeah, yeah. Maybe my stuff's just getting old. I feel like I've been having trouble with that stuff lately, and I've been trying to figure out if Sparkleite or Bentonite can work better for me. But I have the LD Carlson jugs,
Yeah.
and I feel like it's been hit or miss.
Mm.
I feel like it's all over the place.
Yeah.
Some meads clear really well with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so I'm pretty sure I cleared with this one. I don't remember. Also, it also sat for a really long time doing nothing. So it could have just been time, but tell me what you get from this. I'm curious.
I mean, I definitely get the passion fruit, I feel like first.
Uh-huh.
I get the fruits, the dragon fruit in there. The honey, it kind of comes off like grassy.
Yeah. I can see
Yeah,
that. Uh-huh.
I can see like grassy. I get a little bit of alcohol. I don't know if how alcoholic is it? 10.5. That's not bad.
Yeah. It is old though, which is odd to me because
Yeah,
it has sat. I mean, I believe I started this mead a year ago, and I've had lots of things turn out at 10.5% at like 6 months. So it's interesting.
yeah, yeah. I feel like 10.5 shouldn't take that long to
Mm-mm.
mellow out.
It's interesting though.
Yeah. Oh, you get a lot of the honey character and the flavor. That's nice.
Mm-hmm.
I like that. You definitely get a lot of the. You said you got oak in this, right? You get
Yeah.
the oak in the end, or the tannin at the end.
Yep. I
You
don't
can
remember.
feel that grit. Kind of cleans up the sweetness. You get a lot of that honey sweet rush.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the tropical fruits, they play their part. It's kind of like harmonious in there.
Mm-hmm.
Just complement it. But I feel like you get loads of honey flavor in this. This is a lot of a honey forward mead, which is nice.
I do
You
like
don't
that
find
tropical honey. It's fun.
I feel like when people make their fruit meads, like their melomels, they're all like it's just bombs, and they kind of overwhelm the honey,
Yeah.
and you're just drinking fruit juice at some point.
Yeah. Just squeeze some dragon fruit and drink that. Yeah, this was like way later editions of fruit. And I mean, it sat for probably a month or two on the fruit, but it was also stabilized and back sweetened. It had some French oak, I think was the oak I used. So it had some of those elements to help with it, but I definitely found like I've never really played with passion fruit or dragon fruit for that matter. And so I was like, it seems like fun things. I also felt like maybe it was my brain because they're such weird fruits. I was like, these have to go together. They might not go together at all, but my brain put them together because I was like, I've never done it, so they must work together. So, have you ever done anything with either?
No, I'm getting ready to do something. I'm getting ready to do passion fruit.
Oh,
And I actually, you said you added it secondary. I was curious to add it primary. So I may jump primary with it.
yeah.
I haven't decided yet. But I might go primary with the passion fruit pulp with guava and do like a pog mead.
Yeah.
Um, just because I feel like that's kind of the generic tropical go-to. Um, I also really want to do a pineapple starfruit mead, but I know starfruit's really hard to pull out.
Yeah.
So we'll see if I even do that. But I kind of want to. I'm more excited about that than the passion fruit guava.
Yeah.
If I can figure out a way to get some starfruit.
Well, so one thing I find interesting is I didn't buy much passion fruit or dragon fruit. I feel like the container was either 12 or 16 ounces of dragon fruit and maybe 12 or 16 ounces. I had 2 packages of the passion fruit. So like 2 pounds of passion fruit and a pound of dragon fruit, let's say, for a 4-gallon batch. So
Okay.
I wonder if there was a lot of flavor imparting to this brew because it was stabilized and in that secondary state and just left for a long time. So I feel like one of the pros I'm seeing now is like maybe if I just add the fruit later, sometimes I can use less. Even though like this is viscosity wise, it's pretty thin, I would say. It's not a syrupy thick brew, which is sometimes not my favorite, but I don't know. It's obviously just a different viscosity than other meads I've had.
Yeah, I think it's still got a nice body. It's not super thin at all.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like the honey is rich and kind of if it's not that thin, it's got like a perception because of how sweet the honey is going in.
Yeah.
So I think you've got a good thing going there with as far as the body of the mead.
Yeah. I am sending this to two competitions. So if I have those results back by the time I post this, I'll try and share them right here. I'll be curious to see what people think of that. I'm sure, I don't know, it's hit or miss. We have been through some competition stuff, recently.
Yeah.
One, I'm going to transition us a little bit into talking about your experience with mead. You started beer, brewed a lot of beer, I'm sure. And then you're like, hey, let's make some mead. And we have, you are one of our go-to guys, me especially for beer, but also go-to people, judges for Mead Stampede. So you've obviously ingrained yourself into the mead community quite a bit. And I find the kind of parallels of beer and mead to be interesting because they are so different. Having made beer, it's not the same process at all. Mead is like so simple in hindsight compared to beer because you're just like shaking up a carboy and like, I'll walk away for 3 months, and like beer is like, all right, we got to baby this thing, we got to make sure we can dry hop at this point, it's just a little bit different. So what are some challenges you saw? I don't know if maybe you haven't seen a lot of challenges, but going from a beer brewing side to mead, was there anything that really threw you off, or did you find it like super easy in comparison?
So in comparison, the fermentation behind it, it's pretty similar, except in beer you don't add a bunch of nutrients. You don't follow a staggered nutrient protocol.
Yeah.
Like you just dump the yeast and kind of let them do their thing. And it's kind of that's I feel like the difference between beer and mead is all cold side work. So you're working constantly to try and achieve a balance and achieve a clean fermentation.
Mm-hmm.
And beer, it's more hot side work. So you're spending a whole day making it, but once you're done with it, like you just throw it in the carboy and
Right.
let it do its thing. Like it's kind of, it's got it. Like it depends upon where you spend your time, right? And so I think the big challenge for me was understanding my personal taste and the balance of mead and what things provide tannin, how much from each item or ingredient provide the tannin. Same with acids, knowing your fruits and how much to add. It's kind of like, a grist bill or a hop bill where you have to know what you're putting in, but it's a whole lot of knowledge that I didn't have before. And so having to learn ingredients that are you're learning grain and hops and yeast with beer.
Yeah.
But with mead, you can literally put it like anything in it and change it up. So I've been doing a lot of off-centered like meads. I mean, I started my first comp was Mead Stampede, and I did that peanut butter and jelly one. Like, I feel like I go to work and I do traditional beers and do all this stuff,
Yeah.
and then I go into the garage and it's just like, how can I make something wild and wacky?
Yeah, I've had this thought for years. I have to get it out of my brain.
yeah. I want to do an Acer Glen with coffee and salt and smoke.
Yeah.
So
it is definitely more of a sandbox, I would say. I'll say then. But to me, though, you say this, you're like, beer is so simple. It's just grains and these hops. And then I feel almost the opposite because I'm like, there are so many grains and there are so many hops. And like, obviously, I feel like styles are more catered to certain hops. We tried a beer tonight that was, I want to say faking a style and then like, disguising itself as something else. So most styles stick to like, well, you're probably going to stay in this hop range or you're going to stay in this grains. stuff like that. So I'm sure once you get that down, it makes sense. But to me, when I walk in the homebrew store and I look at all the grain walls that they have, and I open up that hop fridge, I'm like, what the heck? What do I do here? Like, there's just so much stuff. So it's kind of fun that you're like, well, it's just, grain and hops. And I'm like, no, it's just way more than grain and hops. Like, there's so much. So that's kind of fun, though.
There's like so many cherries and apples and
That's
things that you
true.
can put in mead
Yeah,
that are just, and they're widely different from each other because you could have like a crab apple that's full of tannin and acid and no sugar, and then you can have, your regular cooking apple, which might not be as good in a mead
that's true. Yeah.
as like a cider apple.
Yeah, we do depend way more on fruits and terroir based things. I feel like
Mhm.
obviously the standard of like when you have a grain or a malt or something like that, they kind of have to keep the same standard throughout it. Like, I don't know, whatever, caramel 20, I don't know if that's real. It has to be the same, the whole time in the same manner. Whereas that honey you buy from somebody from year to year might be different. So yeah, you're right. There are some non-controllable things that you have to learn to control, which is
And with
challenging.
beer, I mean, it's been going around for a long time. So, like, if you want to make a Czech lager, you can go online and find a recipe for a Czech lager. But if you wanted to make a certain type of mead, like a Tej, like,
Hmm.
there's not a million places you can go to try and find like a recipe for that.
It's true. That's true.
Yeah.
That is fun. I love that beer is such like mead is obviously very old, and we have some regional, continental recipes and styles that are created. I do love that beer also goes so far back, and I find that like almost a little bit daunting because at some point, like you said, that playground is a little bit limited, but also like when people do expand those lines, I think that's where like the craft beer scene exploded so much. And I don't know, maybe you can speak into this. I feel like craft beer maybe 5, 10 years ago was just like hitting its peak. I mean, it was like at the cap. Oh my gosh, everybody's making the craziest thing ever. And it's like all coming down. We're getting really neutral with a lot of these things that I've seen. Every once in a while I find one where I'm like, whoa, that's crazy. But mostly the things have been done at this point.
Yeah, there's the innovation is, people are still trying to find the next hype.
Mm-hmm.
There'll always be those breweries trying to find the big thing. But I feel like since like hazy IPA, it's kind of been stagnant.
Mm.
Um, you had the whole IPL cold IPA thing that was happening for a little while. Um, Before that, it was the Brute IPA, which was the
Mm.
champagne yeast
Yeah.
IPA, which I love those, by the
Interesting. I've
way.
never had one. That's fun. Huh.
Yeah, it just dries it right out, and you carb it real heavy, so it's just this hoppy, effervescent thing that you get that's super dry.
Hmm.
Uh, and I think they're fantastic. To be
Interesting.
honest, I don't know why that style went away. I'd have that over hazy
Yeah.
any day.
Huh.
But yeah, like you were saying, it's kind of people are still trying to play that, but I saw a funny graph online where it talks about basically like the trends in the beer industry and how um, you got beer manufacturers making what they want to make, and they do that for a number of years, and then all of a sudden it's beer manufacturers having to make what they consumer wants to stay in business, and then they start doing that until all of a sudden the beer manufacturers can start
Mm.
getting their weight in again to make what they want to make, and it
Yeah.
just does this weird little like curve, and it's kind of neat to see because it goes through the different years and what's kind of going on. I'll
Interesting.
try to find it again and send you a link,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's wild to see how the beer industry has just shifted towards people's tastes and preferences. Because us brewers, we want to like we're working. All I want to drink all day is something like cool, refreshing.
Hmm.
I don't want a pastry stout. I don't want anything real heavy or thick or anything like that. When I'm out with my friends, same kind of thing. Those are fun for like a small experience. I have pastry stouts in the fridge. They're great for like a nice dessert after a good day or something like that, and you're lounging on the couch. But there's going to be a lot of brewers that prefer a nice or like we had a Grodzicki on tap, which is a Polish style smoked wheat beer. and it's very low alcohol. It's like 3%. Nobody wants to buy 3% beer that's smoked. So, but like everybody that would buy it was always in the industry and always brewers. They're like, "Whoa, this is a cool piece of history," and
Craft
like,
beer. Whoa.
yeah. So that was a fun one to do. It was wild. We got a brewery from Poland to fly out and actually kind of collab with us on that one.
Wow.
But yeah, it's this weird shift that's been going on.
Hmm.
We'll see what the next thing is. You know, who knows? It could be. I know sours were on a kick for a while
Mm-hmm.
too. I don't know how much out there, but in the Bay
I've
Area
seen
we had
some. Hmm.
yeah, Prairie might have done a bunch of sours out there. But we had Rare Barrel, and Rare Barrel was killing it with the sour game here until they closed.
I should have sent you. Oh man, I hindsight's 20. So I have all of these Prairie Stouts from 9 years ago that I've just been holding on to. I had a friend a while back who he used to collect beers, and his goal was like, I'm gonna get a 2014 version of this thing, and the next year I'll get the 2015, and then 16, and eventually I'll do this big tasting. Well, he collected them all, held them in his beer closet for like years. Then he had a kid and was like, well, I actually don't think I'm gonna end up doing this. And he dumped like bottles, cases of these like Prairie Stouts, which are like,
Oh
for
no!
anyone who doesn't know, like $9-10 per bottle stouts. Was like, hey, do you want these? I was like, sure. So I have a bunch of them. I should have sent you one because they're very fun to like try. And some of these things are aging well, and then some of them are like, this is not good at all. Like it just does not age very well. But they're all like 11-12%. I mean, they
Okay.
look like motor oil. You're pouring it. You're like, is this safe to drink? I can't really tell with how dark it is and how thick they are. So, but it's really fun to like. I feel like that's a craft beer moment right there. It's like the Prairie Bomb. Have you ever had one of those before?
Yeah, the bomb actually was my first beer from Prairie.
Oh, really?
I found it in Sacramento somewhere,
Hmm.
and it was that. That's how I learned about Prairie out here was that beer. I don't know how it traveled this far, but I found it and loved it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's fun. It's interesting. So you, with your experience in beer, you talked about how the playground, the sandbox is different, so to speak. What were some of those like? Because I feel like you go from a beer style, your brain goes from I'm making these kind of styles to like now I'm making a styles of mead, so to speak. But is there any style that you were immediately drawn to in the beginning, or did you kind of go to a just get anything, try anything kind of status?
The styles that I brew the most, and I felt like I kind of gravitate towards are traditionals.
Mm,
I think that stems towards some of my brewing background. Because if you have a good, clean lager, all your other beers are probably going to be great. So I
yeah.
figured same thing with mead. If you have a great traditional, you can probably make great meads elsewhere. So traditionals is kind of where I always jump to. Experimental, I do stay clear of fruited meads. I have made the
Ooh.
least amount of fruited meads. Yeah, I do a lot of spice herb. I do experimental. It's
What's
just stay
the
away
what's
from.
the worry there? Are you just not wanting to do it, or what's the difference?
I've done a few just for here, but I feel like it's not. I feel like it's something that a lot of people are already jumping on, and I want to find something a little different. I'd rather make
That's fair.
something like a nutmeg mead or
Yeah.
something like that,
Yeah.
than a berry mead or something that has been done.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah.
That's true. It is like I feel like the mead makers are some of the most pave your own path kind of brewers. I feel like a lot of beer brewers are pretty collaborative in that it's like, hey man, I made this really good whatever, and they're like, oh yeah, give me the recipe, I'll do it. I don't think that always happens in the mead world. I feel like sometimes it's like, hey, I made this really cool whatever mead, and the people are like, oh, that's awesome. And then they'll take your recipe and you're like, well, actually, I'm gonna do something a little different here. I'm gonna put this instead. And it's not a bad thing. I'm not saying this in a way to be like, don't do this. But I just think that's the difference is mead makers generally like to be a little more hands on when it comes to recipe development. Because I've very rarely found someone who's like, I brewed your recipe to a T. It's like, I brewed your recipe, but I changed these four things. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
So, depending on the elements, it's changing it quite a bit or not at all. So it's kind of fun.
I did your blueberry mead, but I swapped blueberries for
Yeah.
raspberries.
Yeah, I didn't think the blueberry was a good idea. So I went ahead and went with, strawberries. It's like, yeah,
Yeah,
what?
strawberry.
What do you
Yeah,
mean?
completely change it, you
Yeah.
know.
But again, I don't mean that in a bad way. If people are listening and are like, they're offended by that. That the intent is not to offend you, but to say like we like to be our own creators, and there is, like you mentioned at the beginning of this, an immense amount of pride that comes with your mead, and I think every mead maker feels that, even if it's like, oh, my mead's not that great, but I still feel proud. I am proud of this thing that I created, because I remember having that. I kind of asked the question earlier, how was your first mead? Because I remember having mine, and now looking back on it, it was terrible. I mean, there's no good element to that mead. It was really hot, and it was dry as can be. So, and I burned out the honey character because I bet I used like a champagne yeast, or whatever. But I was so dang proud of that thing, and that's all that mattered. And that's what's got me
Yeah.
here. So it's interesting to see the different sides of beer community versus mead community sometimes.
And like I find it interesting that there's so many mead makers not using any um kind of temperature control.
Mm.
It could just be because a lot of what I see is going to be, beginner mead makers. But like in beer, that's like huge red flag.
Yeah.
It's like there's not a lot of beers that ferments, above 68 is kind of like the prime for ales. So you're kind of wanting to keep things down,
Right.
and I feel like I see a lot more people without like refrigerators or things like that. When I was homebrewing in college, yeah, we had a refrigerator, like
Mm-hmm.
one of those open door refrigerators that we put our carboys in, with two racks, and like we even did it then. But like with mead, it's like, oh yeah, I just put it under the stairs, let it
Yeah.
go, and it's whatever temperature it's at.
Well, that was the whole. I mean, that's like harkening back to the people talking about, Vikings. Well, the Vikings did it this way so many years ago, and you're like, well, yeah. I mean, they did this, but they also didn't have a fridge. They didn't have access necessarily to like clean water and to like all these things, and so it is interesting to me that we don't have as much push into that, but I feel like so many people just harken back to that. Like, well, if the Vikings did it with, rainwater and a puddle and this, then I can drink it and do it well too. And it's like, oh, yeah, I mean, you can, but like, I don't know.
I think the climate is also different way up where they were in versus like New Mexico.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, it was not 110, like, I mean, thank goodness for Kvike strains coming through. Like, I do think those are some of the most fun, like, I can't even say researched things. It's just like harvested kinds of research or yeast or whatever that are able to withstand such a wild climate change. But you're right. There are very few people who are, including myself, who are like, well, I'm brewing this like traditional mead and I'm going to keep it at 66 degrees. It's like, well, I very rarely do that myself because it's just easier to not worry about it. I would be curious, though, to try that. I wonder this because you have a lot of experience with beer yeast. I'm gonna split the gap here and say beer yeast versus wine or mead yeast, even though some can be splitting the gap. Do most beer yeast have a more small range of optimal temperature, best fermentation temperature range, or is I feel like with wine yeast I know like a lot of wide range, but I haven't seen a lot of beer stuff.
To be honest, I can't really say I've studied a ton of beer yeast to know if like they have a certain beer. I know there's some beers yeast out there like US-05 and whatnot, the
Hmm.
basic ones that have wide windows and they're made for people to really like homebrew with, and they're like a clean American ale yeast. Um, but there are definitely some that are narrower. Um, and I feel like maybe not. It might be a lot colder than
Mm.
wine, but I don't know if the windows are necessarily that much different. It
Yeah.
might be. Like I mean, like D47 has like a 9-degree window.
Yeah.
It's
It is wild.
yeah, so it's like
I do
so
love. Yeah, that's true.
yeah.
That sorry, that brought me back to like people are like D47 is my favorite yeast. I'm like, how? What do you keep your house at? You know what I mean? Like it's I think it's 59 to 68, and it's like if the top
Yeah.
range of your
Yeah.
house is 68, so you're telling me, and you can't even at that point you can't keep your house at 68 because it will ferment at 70 or
Yep.
71 or 2 or whatever because the yeast create their heat too. You know, so you're telling me you keep your house at 63 degrees. It's like that just doesn't happen. There's no way. So
No, no, no. I do love D47.
yeah.
I use it a
but
lot.
I mean that's what I mean though. Is like, are you properly fermenting in that range, or are you going? Because it sounds like you're
Yeah.
doing a lot more proper temperature control.
Yeah, yeah. I fermented all down at like 60, 62
Hmm.
degrees. Yeah.
That's the difference though. You are doing it within the range, and that makes sense. I don't like it because I don't want to go shove something in a fridge for that. You know, maybe I should just do it, but also, I don't know. I get lazy when it comes to temperature control, unless it's lagers. At lagers, I'm like all about because you have to do it right. I don't know of many lager yeasts that are like, ferment at 70 degrees and go well. So,
Yeah, no. No, a lot of them like to be real cold in the 50s.
mhm.
Yeah.
So with your experience in beer, are there beer elements that you apply to your mead making very often? I feel like there's.
Sanitation.
Is that the only one? That's the only parallel at this point.
Yeah. No, I do step temperatures during fermentation.
Interesting.
So I'll start it um, kind of towards the bottom of the temperature threshold on the yeast, and I'll towards the end of fermentation creep it up, kind of like you would a diacetyl rest in
Mm.
beer.
Hmm.
But I just do it to try and get it to ferment fully, and at the end, and just kind of ramp it out real quick,
Interesting.
if in case there's anything left at the end. And then slowly, kind of one thing we do at the brewery is we do a slow cold crash. So just step down number of degrees every day. We don't just hit 30 degrees and let it crash.
I see.
Um, so I do a step crash.
What's the purpose
Uh,
there?
it's really for the yeast, which I'm gonna toss at home anyway.
Mm.
But
Yeah.
at work we harvest and we repitch, so it's just kind of one of those commercial things that's been programmed into me to just step the yeast down
Hmm.
and kind of slowly lull it down and flocculate out, versus trying to really crash it and just shock it and come down.
I've seen
Uh,
that with my log. Like when I did the logger, we were talking about that some. It said like, bring it down to whatever degrees in 5 degree increments. And I've always been like, oh, that's interesting. And I'm sure I was like, I know there's a reason, but like I don't ever do that. So I was like, oh, people talk about cold crashing, obviously, and mead making. That's our big thing. So to to do it slower would be kind of a fun test. And you know me, my brain automatically starts thinking about like, well, what happens if I made A/B test out of this thing? So maybe that's what I'll be doing
do
next
it,
in my world.
yeah.
Be kind of
Yeah,
fun.
I think that's something that just has been drilled into me for commercial. But pitching, making sure you pitch your yeast
Hmm.
at a similar temp as what you got in the fermenter, so you're not shocking your yeast. It's kind of like when you put the goldfish in the bag,
Yeah.
in the yeah, that sort of thing.
Huh.
Um, I feel like that's kind of a lot of the carryovers that I can think of.
So
Sure,
you probably deal with a lot of really nice equipment when it comes to your brewery moments where you're able to pump things, and obviously it's a greater quantity of stuff. You're dealing with like probably hundreds of gallons of brew at a time. Going to your homebrew scale, is there ever a point where you're like, man, I gotta rack this stupid 5-gallon bucket over, and you're like, is that more annoying, would you say, because you have such nice things, I'm sure, at the brewery? Or are you like, well, I just know I'm a home brewer, so it's fine?
So the biggest thing that gets me every time I'm working in the garage versus working at work is floor drains. Oh my God, I wish I
Yeah.
had floor drains. Being at work and just spraying everything out and just letting it go to the floor.
Yeah.
So much easier than having to sit there and clean it all up. And my garage has like no drains at all. It's flat. So what I have to do is I have a TC fitting that goes onto the bottom of the conical, and then it'll drain all the way, like a hose, all the way out the garage.
Okay, yeah. That's still helpful. I mean, you got a little bit of a system there.
Yeah. It's something I had to work out to be a drain. And then I don't like working with glass carboys. I've had one break on me, but I've been always nervous since that one break. That I hate working with glass. I just want to work with stainless every day. So
you said you don't do a lot of big fruited meads, but it sounds like you're starting to maybe dive into it from from our conversations a little bit here. Does that mean that most of the stuff you do when you are brewing, so you don't like glass, is in plastic? Are you finding you like, because I know they make a lot of plastic carboys now that are, I maybe ageable in, you can age things in, or are you committing to like, well, I got to actually age this thing in glass at this point?
So I have
or stainless steel, I guess.
Glass carboys. Yeah, I have 6 glass carboys, maybe 8. And I run those for just small batches. They're only 6 to 3 gallon carboys. So I just run those for small batches of things. Usually if I'm trying to do something big and boozy, like for Squid Game, where it was like a 15% blueberry cinnamon mead, I'll throw it in a glass carboy.
Yeah.
Because it's just easier. I have a mulberry mead going right now, even though I don't do too many, fruited meads. I have a mulberry mead going that's low water. It's not no water, but it's low water. Should be about 17% when it's done.
Wow.
So, well, if it gets there, we'll see. We'll see. We'll see what it comes to.
What yeast are you using? That's pretty hot up there. It's got to be a champagne or something, because not many things get up to that 18.
No, I didn't. I only put a yeast that's got a tolerance of like 15, so it probably won't get there.
Okay.
It won't get there. It'll have some residual sweetness. What yeast did I put in there? I think I might have put in Premier Rouge, Red Star Premier Rouge, which is a 15%, I think, tolerance. But I put that in there. It's gonna sit for a year plus. Cool. It's just sitting in the carb. It's gonna sit for a while in that carboy.
Yeah.
But what's in my garage now? I have a Meadowfoam Traditional on tap. I have a Braggot on tap. That's a rye saison base.
Oh, interesting.
And it's cashmere hop and buckwheat and orange blossom honeys. So you get a lot of that rye bite mixed with the buckwheat kind of funk. Man, it's getting dark in here.
Yeah, it's okay.
You mix with the buckwheat funk, and then you got the orange blossom to kind of richen it and liven it up a little bit, and the cashmere brings that melon flavor, that honeydew melon flavor that kind of helps with complement the orange blossom and lift it a little. And then I have the hydromel de Jamaica, which is just hibiscus. And then I have another fruited mead. There you go. I got a peach pie mint going right now.
Oh, cool. How'd you do your peaches for that one? I'm curious.
Peach nectar.
Hey, that's great. That's great.
So I ended up we were at the brewery, and I I got these free wine kits from BSG or a malt provider. They just were like, "Hey, here you go. Here's a free bag of grain, raw grain to try out. Here's some free hops. Here's some free yeast. They were all mangrove, jack yeast.
Yeah.
And then they gave us 12 gallons worth of wine kits. And I was like, dope. I know what I'm
Yeah.
gonna do with that. So I put it together. It was like a white wine blend, and I put in just orange blossom honey because I had an extra bucket lying around, and then threw
Yeah.
threw in the peach nectar that it came with. It tastes. It honestly tastes like a Capri Sun right now. It's not bad. It's not good.
Hey, a bit like carbonated Capri Sun. I mean, it might. Who knows? That might go well. People might be into that.
Yeah, it's all right. I'm throwing in some oak. I'm getting it's just too sweet.
Hmm.
It needs a lot of tannin. It needs some acid. So I'm just playing around with it right now to get it dialed in,
Yeah.
but it'll turn out good. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, so you kind of bring up a topic that I find interesting. Beer is such a very clear category. When you taste something, it is easy sometimes to be like, this is beer. I know that this is beer. And it could be a carbonation standpoint, it could be the malt. Identifying factors that suggest like this is a beer, Mead can be a little more tough, I feel like, because we do start to throw so many other flavors in where, you said mulberry. Let's say you really lean into like the mulberry side and you're going like 85% mulberry strong, whatever, 15% honey. If people aren't totally familiar with honey side, they might miss the quote mead side of it, and they might think like, well, this is a wine. It's like, well, no, it's still mead. It's just maybe not as honey focused. And I feel like we struggle with that sometimes, where if you don't necessarily know how to identify honey and the characters that are there, you can sometimes miss it with the other flavors. Obviously, a traditional is like, you can't miss that. That's all honey at that point.
Yeah.
But other flavors can be conflicting. So with that in mind, are you like when you're picking these honeys, because you said buckwheat and orange blossom, which I find really interesting because that's buckwheat. Anytime someone says buckwheat, there's like a red flag and like a buzzer that goes off in my head. It's like a danger warning. I'm like, oh my gosh, they're using buckwheat, because like buckwheat is just so strong that it can be overwhelming. Do you find that your honey characters and your things like that, like you depend more on, not depend, you equate them maybe to like malts when it comes to beer brewing? Is that how you're viewing honey at this point, or are you? I don't know. I guess I'm trying to get to there. That's what I'm trying to get to. Do you see honey as malt because of your beer brewing experience?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Yeah, I see it. Kind of like when we just brought up the buckwheat and the orange blossom. Like it's something where I'll be like, hey, like I like orange blossom a lot, and the buckwheat I also really like. So how can I incorporate the two? And also like when you start looking at the volume of what you're using, because that batch is mostly orange blossom because you only need a little bit of eastern buckwheat to really add that funk.
Yeah.
So it's mostly orange blossom with a small amount of buckwheat, just enough to provide the color, give you that little like barnyard thing going on,
Mm.
and kind of dip out.
Yeah. Yeah. I did what was it? A buckwheat, rum, oak, buckwheat bochet at one point. And I don't know what my brain was thinking, because buckwheat is like, for anyone who's not used it, barnyardy, super strong. You can hop over there. You're good.
I'm gonna try and turn on his lights. It's
You're
just
good.
so dark. That's
Well,
so
so
good.
buckwheat honey, like we were saying, it's just very strong, and I recommend people to use it. Part of, and I'm sure you feel this way with beer brewing, your experience with like malts. I keep equating you to beer. Obviously, you make mead, but I think your experience in beer is what we're really tapping into today. Your experience with like different malts is what allowed you to be able to pair things well. So at some point, because you had tried orange blossom honey and buckwheat honey, you were able to put them in the same vein and say like, well, I know that these could complement each other. The only way you got there though was like to try them both. And so I think that's important to note for people is like part of this experimentation is like just testing different honeys. And that's my favorite part of mead making. I love getting to try different honeys from different places. So I'm sure that you've had your hands on a few different kinds of honey. Where do you generally find? Are you buying 60-pound pails? Or are you buying smaller batches? Obviously, you're making some big brews, so I feel like you need a lot of honey.
Yeah, so I've been brewing a lot of 24-gallon batches. And so I've been
Wait, like
buying pails.
homebrew? Like 24-gallon homebrew?
Yeah.
What are you brewing in? They get 24 gallons.
They're conicals. They're straight stainless steel
Oh my
conicals at home with a
gosh.
glycol chiller. Yeah.
Holy crap.
Yeah. So it requires a pail for that. Like the meadow foam. I
Man,
did 24 gallons of meadow foam traditional, um, which I bought a pail of and made.
that's crazy.
It's expensive.
Yeah. Meadow foam is not like
You're just like,
so. Well, you earlier, like you said, meadow foam, and I was like, okay, he made like 5 gallons, which is still, depending on how high ABV, whatever, we might be using like 10 to 15 pounds for 5 gallons. But you're using a whole pail of meadow foam, which is really good honey. But oh my gosh, that's expensive. Holy
60
cow.
pounds. Yeah. I actually still have a little bit left of that bucket.
Did you
Um,
recipe test before you made that big batch? Okay, I figure so.
yeah. So it was my second time making it. So it
Okay.
wasn't too much. But I had recipe tested it with a 5 or 6 gallon batch first.
Okay.
And I typically do that. That's what the glass carboys are for. They're made to just kind of do some small stuff, some play around
Yeah.
testing. When I do the pineapple starfruit or the passion fruit guava, it'll be in a 5 gallon each. And then once I figure out the way I want to do it, I'm gonna jump up to a 24 gallon.
Okay.
But this is all kind of stepping stones for later. I want to
Yeah.
try and run commercially. So
Hmm.
this is trying to figure out, okay, how do you take 5 gallons to 24? And then once I figure that out, okay, how do I scale that to 20 barrels, which is about 600 and some odd gallons. So,
Big jump.
yeah, yeah. So, but hopefully the scale will be, the same or
Yeah.
similar enough to just do it. So we'll see.
Hmm.
We'll see what happens.
That's a whole nother rabbit hole of like recipe development to large scale batch. Obviously, like everybody wants it to be a 1-to-1, but it's not. Like,
It's not.
I feel like with most homebrew recipes, you can go down easy. 5 gallon batch. Okay, I need to make a gallon of it. I'm just going to divide by 5. And it like generally works aside from maybe yeast or some other elements in that regard. But going the opposite way, 5 gallon batch, you can't just be like, well, I'm making 600 gallons of it. I'm just going to multiply by 120. It's like, that's not quite that simple. And people don't always think about that. I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges. And I don't know this for sure, but I'm imagining people who start meaderies is if they haven't done that research or done the testing like you have, you can't just jump in and suddenly multiply by whatever number to get your ultimate scale. So I'm not going to affect anyone's brain by telling them that, but I think that's something to consider if anybody's listening and going, I enjoy this. I want to make more on a commercial scale. Dive a little deeper, do what Steven's doing, and make a little bit bigger batch. And then make a little bit bigger batch from there. And then, work your way up to a however many gallon. I feel like that's safer than just assuming at some point.
Yeah. Yeah. So a lot of the mead gets used. I am a part of a homebrew club, and there's, they'll go out and we'll do beer fests and things like that. So it all gets used up. And working in a brewery and homebrewing mead at home, like it's just every time I go out or something, it's just all I bring. So it's just kind of the passion in life. You're just
Yeah.
that's all I spend my money on, but it's all I do.
Yeah.
And just kind of a bit of who I am, I guess.
So I guess we haven't talked about this at all. Do you do any beer brewing at home? Like
Well, I did the
strict?
rice saison
Okay,
for
okay, yeah. You
that's
mentioned one
actually a
earlier.
blend, yeah, for the braggot. Um, I have the grist bill and the hops for a Belgian single in the garage. But not so much anymore, honestly,
Hmm.
because it does like I have the equipment in the garage, but it feels kind of like work.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, you do it all day and you're like, I don't really want to do this. I understand that. I almost feel like I worry about that as I want to do more with the meadery, that at some point I'll be like, well, when I go and do the meadery stuff there, that's the work. And then I come home, I'm like, I don't want to worry about it as much. But we'll see if I get there at that point. It'd be kind of interesting. So my last little
Yeah.
thing, I'm curious, as a somebody who dips their toes in both categories on a daily basis, what for the mostly mead people who are listening, because I think I don't really attract a lot of beer brewers. That's not my, not my demographic, unfortunately. Um, how would you suggest that people who want to get involved in beer brewing, where do they start? Are there any like websites or like not necessarily recipes, resources that you would recommend that they start with to get their recipes or anything like that?
Yeah, the first book I read, and I feel like everybody reads, is The Complete Joy to Homebrewing. Charlie's book, just he talks to you like a friend and goes over everything you need to know, has basic recipes. It's the complete mead maker, but for beer.
Yeah.
And it's kind of been the iconic, starting book
Hmm.
for people in getting into the homebrewing beer hobby. Um, Another one, what's Palmer's book? He's got a homebrewing book too, which is fascinating, and it's the same kind of thing, just easy to read, goes over a lot of the beer science, and but honestly, if you read one, you don't really need to read the other. You can,
Yeah.
but it's going to be a lot of the similar information, um, just for you know. I guess that's really that's it. It's just read a book first,
Hmm.
and figure out the basics of brewing. It's all hot side work.
Hmm.
So once you figure out, okay, this is what I got to do that day, plan ahead, because it is a long day. So you're gonna want to make sure you have everything in order. You know what you're gonna be doing, what steps. Don't go into it blind.
Hmm.
And the big thing that Charlie says too is just relax, don't worry, have a homebrew.
Yeah.
Your beer is going to be fine in the end.
Hmm.
Unless you make up some major mistakes, you're gonna have a decent beer. So it's fun. If you got homebrew clubs around you too, and you just want to learn, you're more of a hands-on person and less of reading a book, join a homebrew club.
Hmm.
Just say, hey, look, I'm here to learn. Go see somebody on their brew day. People love to just like have somebody there while they're brewing and just be like, oh yeah, this is what I'm doing, and this
Yeah.
is my beers. Try my beers. Like, homebrewers are really just proud of what they do, what they make. They're really easygoing. They'll share. So don't be afraid of, just walking into a homebrew club or
Hmm.
going into your homebrew shop and asking what the local homebrew club was. Our homebrew shop even hosts certain days of the month, some kind of like training seminars where you could go and you could actually meet people who homebrew. And it's, another easy way in to getting to know people if you don't know anybody who's doing it.
That's super cool. We have, I'm trying to think if we have something like that in ours, but definitely homebrew clubs are like, that's where I recently joined one for the first time in forever. And
Hey,
it's just super fun. I'm the mead guy. I mean, everybody else is brewing beer. So I showed up with all my stuff and they're like, I got tagged or I got added to the Facebook group and it was like, my little thing was like mead guy. Like they already like labeled me as a mead guy. I'm like, that's fine. I mean, that's
there
my
you go.
life. That's literally I've established myself in that guy. In that I'm that guy. So it works out. But definitely
But,
investing in that is fun.
is that foam? Are you a part of Foam?
No, that's up in Tulsa. So there's one
Oh,
here.
okay.
Yeah, the one I have here is there's a couple around here, but there's one that's like an Edmond, like a group that's like the town above Oklahoma City or whatever, you know. So there's that. It's like one that centralizes there. So,
Okay,
anyways,
nice.
it's kind of fun, and so I definitely recommend that to try it. If you've never done that before, is probably someone around you unless you live in the boonies. If you live in the boonies, you probably don't have many people, but you might have a neighbor who homebrews. So who knows? Go hang out with them and see what happens. But so I want to plug, I did this kind of in the last little talk too, but Steven is someone who knows a lot about beer, and he's like, for lack of a better term, he's my beer guy. So whenever I have beer questions, I'm coming to him because he knows a lot about it. And he's also very active in the Man-Made Mead Discord. If you are a part of that, his tag is SteveO. And I'm sure that if you had a question for him and you tag him, he would be willing to answer, because beer is an expansive subject and we're all here to learn. So I imagine that he's willing to answer some questions. But it's been a lot of fun to get to chat with you, Steven, and I appreciate you not only just being willing to chat, but like a lot of people don't know this, but if they've watched videos on the channel, you've been in a bunch of other videos in the past too, and so you've done peanut butter jelly meads with me. You've done Squid Games was the big one too. That was a fun video, and so I actually have a mead I need to send to you because of your work on that. I gotta send you something.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. So, but anyways, if you want to check out and hang out with Steven a little bit, he'll be on the Discord as well. You can tag him there. But thank you for hanging out with me this evening and chatting about beer and your experience and everything that happens with that.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Ren. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for giving me the privilege to try your meats too.
Yeah, man.
And beer.
Well, we will see you in the Discord.
See you in the Discord.
All right. Cheers.